Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive today? We're going to tackle how to get comfy with uncertainty. Like all that mastering the unknown stuff. You guys sent in some really great excerpts, and honestly, who couldn't use a little more peace when life throws curveballs, right?
You tell me. It's like everyone wants the roadmap, but surprise life doesn't always work that way.
Exactly. And just hearing that uncertainty is a part of life makes me want to hide under a blanket. But this guide we're looking at, there's this one line that really grabbed me. It talks about uncertainty bringing more peace and growth. That feels kind of backward, doesn't it?
I get it. It's like our brains are wired to crave certainty. It feels safe, familiar. But there's this cool study from Penn State, actually mentioned in the guide, that says the more comfortable we get with not knowing, the more adaptable we become in all areas of life.
So less freaking out when plans change and more, okay, what's the new plan kind of thing.
Exactly. And this goes for everything. Think about it.
Yeah.
Work, relationships, even those doubts we have about ourselves.
Okay, I'm listening, but how do we actually do that? The guide jumps into all these how-tos, but I kind of need a why first.
Good point. It's like this. When we accept that we can't control everything, that frees us up to get creative. We can find new ways to respond when things get messy.
That's interesting. It's like that Brené Brown quote, vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation. When we let go of needing all the answers, that's when new possibilities show up, right?
100%. Same idea here. The guide really emphasizes how embracing uncertainty can help us break free from rigid thinking. It's like we can tap into our inner problem solver.
All right, I'm seeing the upside here, but how do we make it real? How do we put that into practice?
That's where the guide's toolkit comes in. It starts with figuring out your own personal uncertainty triggers. Like, what sets off your alarm bells when things feel uncertain?
Love that analogy. So what are we talking about here? What usually sets those alarms up?
Well, the guide mentioned a few common ones. Job stuff is big career changes, fear of getting laid off, that kind of thing. Those can really get the anxiety going.
For sure. Work stuff is stressful.
Yeah. And then there are those big life changes, moving, having kids, even breakups or losing someone you care about.
Because those come with a whole other level of unknowns, right?
Exactly. And of course, we can't forget about relationships,
Oh, tell me about it.
right? Miscommunications, things changing, those can leave you feeling kind of shaky. So the key is, once you're aware of what sets you off,
Yeah.
then you can start figuring out how to navigate those things with a little more grace, a little more resilience.
So it's like we're creating a personalized warning system for uncertainty in our lives.
Exact.
I can get behind that. But knowing what sets you off is only half the battle, right?
Right.
What do we do when those uncertainty alarms start going off? What's the game plan?
That's where the mindfulness techniques that are in the guide are really helpful.
Yeah.
The guide emphasizes that instead of getting swept up in all those anxious thoughts, what happens when those alarms go off?
Oh, yeah.
Instead of getting swept away by those thoughts, we can learn to just observe them, without judgment,
Okay.
and then gently bring our attention back to the present moment.
Okay, I've heard a lot about mindfulness, but I'll be honest, sometimes it feels a little too out there for me. What does that actually look like in practice?
I hear you. It's not all like sitting on a mountaintop meditating. The guide actually gives some really practical grounding techniques. Simple things that you could do anytime, anywhere to just kind of reconnect with your senses and calm that fight or flight response down.
Like what? Give me an example. I need something concrete.
Okay, so one technique it talks about is called the 5-4-3-2-1 method.
Okay.
Have you heard of this one?
I have not.
Okay, so you're going to name 5 things that you can see around you right now,
Okay.
4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste.
Wow.
So it's really about shifting your focus from the swirling thoughts in your head to the concrete reality around you.
I like that. It's very specific. And I can see how that would help break the spiral of just overthinking, especially when you're in those moments where you're feeling really overwhelmed.
Totally. And what the guide points out is that when you practice these kinds of techniques regularly, it can actually help rewire your brain over time
Oh, wow.
to be more resilient to uncertainty. It's like building a muscle, right?
Okay.
The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
So we're swapping out fight or flight for pause and observe.
I love that.
Yeah, I like that too. I'm going to use that.
Trademark?
There's another phrase that the guide uses that I wanted to touch on. It talks about having a flexible mindset. Yeah. What does that mean?
Yeah, so a flexible mindset is all about approaching challenges as opportunities for growth rather than threats to your well-being.
Right.
So it's really shifting that perspective from, why is this happening to me, to what can I learn from this?
So instead of woe is me, my plans are ruined, it's more like, okay, this is an opportunity to be creative and find a new path forward.
Exactly. And, this ties into another thing that the guy talks about, which is setting realistic expectations.
Ooh, that is a big one for me. I am so guilty of assuming that things are going to go perfectly according to my very detailed plan.
Right.
And then, bam, disappointment hits hard.
But you're not alone, though, right?
Ooh.
The guide reminds us that life is rarely a straight line from A to B. It's more like, a winding road with unexpected detours.
For sure.
And that's okay. It's more about, can we learn to kind of embrace the bumps along the way?
Yeah. Easier said than done sometimes, right?
100%. But the guide argues that a big part of navigating uncertainty successfully is cultivating resilience.
Okay, cultivating resilience is one of those buzzwords you hear everywhere. But I always wonder, is that something you can actually learn? Or are some people just born with that superpower?
Right, like a resilience gene.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, guide's really clear about this. It says resilience is definitely a skill, not some magical thing you're born with. And it actually gives you steps to build it. It all starts with having that growth mindset we were talking about earlier.
Right.
Seeing those challenges as opportunities to learn and grow, that helps us bounce back stronger.
So it's like we're reframing failures as just stepping stones instead of roadblocks?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And another big thing for building resilience that the guide talks about is having a strong support system.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes surrounding yourself with people who lift you up. Offer different perspectives.
People to remind you you're not alone in the trenches.
100%. Because going through tough times by yourself is just harder. It's just the way it is.
A doubt about that.
So having people to lean on, to brainstorm with, even just to process your emotions with, can make a huge difference.
Totally. And speaking of things that make a difference, the guide also gets into stress management techniques.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And not just the usual get enough sleep advice. It actually talks about journaling and meditation as ways to deal with that mental overload.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is that those things, they have a lot in common with the grounding techniques that we talked about earlier.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, they both really focus on bringing your awareness to this present moment, right now.
Yeah.
Instead of getting stuck in those what-ifs about the future or the should-haves of the past.
Right. So it's about being present.
Yeah.
Instead of trapped in our heads.
Exactly. It's like all these different techniques are pointing to the same thing.
Yeah.
Finding a calmer, more centered you.
Love that. And from that centered place, we're better equipped to deal with whatever life throws at us, right? Uncertainty included.
100%.
Yeah.
But the guide actually takes it a step further. It says it's not just about tolerating uncertainty, it's about embracing it.
Okay, now that feels like a whole other level. I'm getting better at the managing part, but embracing uncertainty, that's a little daunting.
I hear you. It's a big leap. But there's a really important distinction that the guide makes here. It says acceptance. It isn't about liking the unknown.
Okay.
It's about not letting it paralyze us.
So less, woohoo, bring on the chaos, and more, okay, uncertainty is happening. What can I do with this?
Exactly. And remember what we were saying before about adaptability.
Yeah.
The more we can get comfortable with not knowing, the easier it is to navigate those twists and turns.
Makes sense.
And get this, the guide talks about this research from Cambridge that found a link between accepting uncertainty and more happiness.
Seriously?
Yeah.
That's wild. Okay, so the less we resist, what is the more peace we find?
Exactly. It's like learning to dance with uncertainty instead of trying to control every step.
I love that analogy. This has been amazing. Honestly, I feel so much more ready to handle whatever comes next, whatever that may be.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
And remember, uncertainty, it's just part of life.
For sure.
And a lot of times, it's in those not knowing moments that we discover our biggest strengths. And we end up creating some of our most amazing experiences.
That's a good thought to hold on to. Thanks for guiding us through all this. It's been really eye-opening.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
And for everyone listening, as you're figuring out your own way to deal with uncertainty, remember this. You're not alone. You've got this. And sometimes those uncertain paths lead to the best adventures.